Have you talked about death with your family? Hi, I'm Cora Naylor, certified coactive coach and emotion co-practitioner. A couple of things that empty nesters tend to put off is doing their wills and talking openly about their death wishes, whether it's for themselves or their family. So today I've invited Karen Hendrickson to join us. Karen is a coach, end-of-life doula, and end-of-life planning and death education facilitator. She helps clients get comfortable with the uncomfortable, specifically with their own inevitable mortality. She removes the fear, confusion, and uncertainty that can come with accepting and planning our own death, and she provides the holistic support for end-of-life patients, families, and caregivers, giving them a sense of compassion, understanding, and control over the end-of-life journey, the challenges and the emotions that are inevitable. The greatest gift we can give ourselves is a life well lived, and the greatest gift we can give our loved ones is a death well planned for. So, welcome, Karen.
Thank you, Cora. I'm so glad to be here today.
Yeah, I know. I think a lot of people are interesting to hear what you've got to say because it's not something that's really common.
No, it's not, right? So the whole reason why I do this work is because we all want to talk about it and we all want to get comfortable with it, but we're afraid.
Yeah, and I think it's like a will. I mean, it's interesting to me how many friends that I've known over the years with kids who didn't have a will. And it sounds morbid to talk about it, but at the same time, once it's done, you don't have to talk about it or think about it anymore.
Exactly, right? And it's sort of just like sex, right? If you talk about sex, it doesn't mean that you're going to get pregnant, right? So if you talk about death and dying, it doesn't mean that you're going to die today or tomorrow. But the reality is we're all going to die. And I sort of look at it from the perspective of, all of us in our life are writing a story. And if you consider a book that you read, the best part of a book always is a fantastic ending. And so why wouldn't we want to create a fantastic ending for our own story, our own life story?
Yeah. And I think the idea is if you talk about it while you're alive and healthy, so everybody knows what your wishes are, if something tragic comes along, it takes the pressure off because that's such an emotional time. If you actually know what everybody's wishes are, then you don't have to try and think of that while you're going through all those emotions.
Yeah, for sure, right? So you definitely, number one, remove the burden of those that you love or those that might be held or asked to make decisions for you, right? Those individuals, if you establish your plan, if you get really clear about what matters most to you when you are healthy and you can identify what you want in the way of care and even after death care and, cremation, burial, all of those things. When you get clear on all of that stuff when you're healthy, you enter into it in a way that is much more positive and heartful versus fearful and scared, which happens when you've been given diagnosis, right? Or something's occurred in that way. And then when you do that, when you are healthy, you can actually have more productive and honest conversations with your people as well, because they aren't with the emotion of your illness and fear of what's going to happen and occur. So you come from a healthier place to start with, right? And then when you create that plan and you give that gift to your people who may have to act on your behalf, what they're doing is they're coming from a place of love and acting in honor and respect for you in fulfilling the wishes that you've already laid out versus making a decision about, maybe stopping some machine support, medical machine support for you, right? And then always wondering for certain, was that the right decision I should have made for my mom? So there's a burden and a guilt that goes long beyond, that feeds into how they manifest and travel with their guilt, or pardon me, their grief afterwards as well, right? So it makes the whole process a little lighter, right? It's always going to be challenging. Illness is always going to be challenging. The death of a loved one is always going to be hard, right? From a grief and loss perspective, but there's ways that we can do it so that it's a little bit lighter and a little bit easier for all of us.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
If people can just get focused on that part and knowing it's just making the plan so that if and when the time comes, you have different scenarios and you'll have a better idea what to do while you go through the emotions.
Exactly.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit more then about exactly what is an end-of-life doula. I know a lot of people have heard of a birth doula, but
Yeah.
an end-of-life doula is something, a little bit different term.
Yeah, so when we all are very familiar with a birth doula, right? So that's the individual that's a non-medical professional that provides holistic support to a mom and family when they're bringing a new life into the world, right? Because it is a sacred event that occurs in our life. And so a death doula or an end of life doula is almost exactly the same, except on the other end of the spectrum. And again, helping to support family and individuals in that end of life journey and honor that sacred aspect of life. It's sacred as well too, right? And oftentimes what can happen is that someone will receive a terminal diagnosis and they'll go on for a period of time with treatment, then the treatment will stop for whatever reason, personal choice, or there's nothing else that is beneficial to that patient and eventually maybe ends up in hospice, either in the bricks and mortar hospice like McKinney Creek here in Maple Ridge, or they receive hospice care at home, right? But oftentimes what families will say to me is, okay, my mom's just gone into hospice, and so like, now how long do we have to wait for her to die? Because she's dying now. And with the doula support, and that sort of, it's a spiritual, sacred, it's kind of a very fluid kind of support that we provide, but it creates opportunity for people to see that, in fact, someone with a terminal illness is living. They're living with terminal illness until they die. And so how can we find ways to help people adjust that camera lens for themselves a little bit, to see things a little bit differently, to change the face of hope. So, there's a lot of grief and loss that's being experienced already on the journey around my person's dying, my mom's dying, right? My gosh, I'm going to lose my mom. And so we try to change the hope that my mom will live into hope that my mom has a fulfilling and quality of life as much as possible, and that we can create really rich, magical moments, even though she's living with illness. It's different, right? So we just help to adjust the lens. It can be advocating for a patient and family who are receiving maybe home health care, and there's always challenges that come into that, right? So we're talking about individuals, personal emotions, deep grief, fear, and oftentimes communication is confusing, or there are gaps, right? Like our systems do have gaps. Our medical system have gaps. Our professionals are taxed in resources and time and don't necessarily have the opportunity to actually sit and be present with patients and family to support them and acknowledge their fear and their concerns and find answers for them, right? And find things that they can focus on and do that can help the journey. So often they feel powerless. They have no control. So on the front end, if we do the educational work and we help to open up our minds to have the conversations and create good plans, then when we're in the thick of it, it's a little bit easier for us to focus on those things that can still bring us some joy and honor our person, right? And so, that can look like all kinds of things. Sometimes it looks like music therapy. We do, I encourage sometimes. So as a death doula, we have a lot of other resources and a lot of different forms of practitioners that we can bring in to support our person, the person and the family that we are supporting. They might be Reiki specialists. They might be massage therapists. They could be music therapists, any kind of thing, right? So we can bring those in. If those things are valuable for your person and stuff that's enjoyable, then we try to create as much joy, right? And we try to fill the experience with as much love and compassion as we can. So ensuring that we're sharing the things we need to share, saying the things we need to say, right? And so in my work, oftentimes what I find is, first off, number one, what can happen is the family doesn't want to acknowledge with the patient that the patient is dying, right? And the patient doesn't want to scare the family and let the family know they're dying. And the truth is, everybody knows it's happening. And so let's just talk about that, right? Let's just bring ourselves together in our fear together, right? And that, because that's how it becomes more sacred and honorable, and we're actually being authentic in the experience, right? And not being afraid of it. And we turn it into beautiful experiences by doing this, right? The forgiveness, the I love yous, here's what I'm so grateful for. Here's what I am so grateful for, what you've brought to my life, right? What you've shared with me, what you've taught me, and vice versa, right? And even in difficult relationships sometimes, or estranged relationships, we can help to set the stage so people get comfortable in coming back together, right? They don't resolve the issues, but they resolve themselves to the state of their relationship and have the ability to at least say, I'm sorry, please forgive me, right? And I forgive you.
Yeah,
And
I
that,
think that's really
life is about us learning how to love and live fully. And that's the ultimate for me, right? Like that is, it brings tears to my eyes when I think about it, because it's the most honorable moment and experience on that deep reach level that we can allow ourselves to have if we open ourselves up to the conversations early and exploring it early, right?
yeah, and it's really important. Probably difficult for some families because some families don't have conversations about sort of normal things before they even get there. But you
Yeah,
also don't want to have any regrets after because, after the fact, there's no going back. So if there's something that you did want to say and you didn't get a chance to, now you have to live with that if you don't get it cleared beforehand.
yeah. And so often too, what we find is that number one, people aren't really aware of what their options are and what is available to them. More often than not. So there's stats that show that 80% of us would, if we had our choice, would die at home. Less than 30% of us do. 80% of us want to have the conversations with our doctors around end of life planning and advanced care planning, right? Less than 30% of us do, right? 100% of us die.
Right.
In the majority of families and clients that I've worked with, more often than not, I would say probably at least 90% of the time, that experience is one of there's diagnosis, or there's been an event, right? A health event, or there's a diagnosis, or, we can sort of see the timeline on death. And now all of a sudden, the patient, if they have the capacity, is wanting to do all of this catch up on their life, right? All of this catch up on their relationships with each other, all of this catch up on the bucket list things I never did, right? I mean, and that's something too that as a doula we sometimes do. We use virtual reality to help bring experiences to patients, right?
Mhm.
Bring virtual reality even to just help with meditative practice and calming practice, right? To bring peace and release anxiety. So there's lots of things, creative things that we can do, right? But how unfortunate that we wait until we can see the exit door
Yeah.
before we live the way we truly wish we would live,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, that's
So,
one of the things that why we both got into coaching to try and help people before we get to your conversation. But
yeah,
better late than never. Let's at least have the conversation.
yeah.
So, just as the last few minutes here, what are the differences, or how does someone know when they need your service as opposed to what are they getting through the medical system? Not
Well,
sure.
that can come at any point in time, right? So I do some work with healthy individuals around advanced care planning and representation agreements and what's most important to them for their long term, right? Choices around end of life. I help facilitate conversations with their people. Sometimes it feels uncomfortable, so I help to facilitate that. Other times it could be in the last weeks, all of a sudden, right? All of a sudden, caregiver or family is just sort of feeling like they're just collapsing under everything that's happening, and just need a resource and reach out, right? The unfortunate thing today is that our healthcare professionals in palliative care, as an example, they may know or have heard of a death doula or an end of life doula, but there is no clear understanding as to how we can add value. And in fact, we actually, by supporting a patient and their family, we actually can add value to the health professionals as well, because it can help to make that integration easier and smoother, right? Because we're providing a support that they just don't have the time and the resource to provide. They do great work, but there's a gap,
Yeah.
and patients and families will always tell you there's a gap. And oftentimes, they've said to me, I never even knew the value of this until you stepped into our life, right? And I become part of their care team, and I become a part of their unit of family, right? Like it's so honorable for me to do the work, right? Because it's so sacred.
Yeah. Yeah, it must be very special, and I can definitely feel your emotion in it
Yeah,
because you become part of their family as you go through that process, I'm sure.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's always honorable when they choose you, right? So,
yeah, that's beautiful.
yeah,
And so I'm so glad that you got to come on here and fill in everybody a little bit more about how the end of life doula works, and if it's something that they know about now, they can go forward with that if they need it. We also have your website running along the bottom, so that's karenhendrickson.ca. Is there any information that they can get there if they go to your website, Karen?
Absolutely, they can. So you'll see on my website that there's a coaching page, and there is a page specific for end-of-life doula and all the services that are available through that. It is sort of a personal package service that we do, right? Because needs are unique to the individuals and the people that are seeking the help, but there's some good information there around my work. Then there's also information there around education programs and webinars and those types of things that we do ongoingly. Taking the month of July off, you'll see on my website that come August, there's actually some new and exciting things coming up for us around online training and webinars. So, and that's an ongoing practice. So the more people we can engage in conversation and bring to the table, the better we will all be, because then we will all die better.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you,
so
Cora.
much. Again, thanks for coming on today, Karen. And if anybody wants, go ahead and get in touch with Karen if you have any questions. And if you're an empty nester and you're not a part of my empty nester group, we'd love to have you. So just comment below with a yes, and we'll get you added in so you can get the support of other women going through the empty nest journey together. And also you'll get notified of the interviews that we've got coming up. Excellent. So thanks again, Karen, for joining us, and we'll see everybody next time.
Thank you, Cora. I'm glad to be here.